All right. So back to this diagram. This is the diagram from the Redux intro slides. Second, I guess third slide in. And when we originally discussed this, we said we were going to cut across from action to reducer, ignoring the middleware. Well, as we see from the diagram, and as you've had experience with, whether you realized it or not, middleware sits right between your action creators that dispatch the action. Before that action goes to the reducer, the action is passed into middleware. Okay? You can do whatever you want with the action in middleware, and then it gets passed to the reducer. Okay? The whole point of middleware is to intercept the actions right before they go into the reducer. So if you want to make changes to them, or, and like I said, the most common case, handle promises, the middleware is the place to do that. You can use middleware for all kinds of different things. You could use it to, let's say you're calling a third-party API that you have no control over, and it sends you really messy data. You can actually use your middleware to reorganize that data before it goes to the reducer. That way you don't have to reorganize the data inside of the reducer. Okay? Just an example. Most commonly, though, middleware for everyday use, most common use is asynchronous actions. Okay? Because by default, your action creator cannot be asynchronous and your reducer cannot be asynchronous, because whatever it returns instantly goes to the next thing. So because of that, middleware is used to handle those asynchronous actions. We've already been using it. We just npm installed a piece of middleware called Redux Promise that allowed us to make what looked like a normal action creator. We returned an object, and then our data magically would appear in the reducer with the data from the server. What you didn't see is the middleware was capturing that, checking the payload, checking to see if the action has a payload property. If it does have a payload property, it was then checking to see if it had a promise on that payload property. If it did have a promise, then it was handling, resolving that promise, and then once it got the data from the server, then passing it to the reducer. If it did not have a payload property that had a promise on it, it would just send the action on through the reducer without changing it whatsoever. Okay? So the middleware is doing really cool stuff for you. And what we're going to do now is we're going to recreate the Redux Promise middleware. Okay? So we're going to restore our app's functionality to what it is right now. We're going to break it first. We're going to remove the current middleware. And we're going to build our own middleware. And once we're done, it should work exactly the same way it does now without us changing anything other than the middleware. Theoretically. And once we build our middleware, we're going to talk a little bit more about some of the methods that are available to us inside the middleware. But first, you need to see it before I start talking more about it. So we should have left off on our to-do app. This isn't necessarily a continuation of the to-do app, but we're going to use the to-do app to demonstrate middleware. So we don't want to mess up our nice, clean, working master branch, so we'll create a new branch to mess with. And we'll just call it middleware. So down the road, some of you may already mess with Node a little bit. But if you haven't, and probably eventually you will, Node has, or let me rephrase that, Express also uses middleware. Kind of the same concept. It allows you to write some kind of functionality for every request that comes to the server before it goes to your actual endpoints. Okay? When we did the little project setup demo, we used app.use, and then we passed it a couple different things. We used app.use a couple different times. When you say app.use, you are applying middleware. Okay? That is called middleware. It is some function that everything runs through before moving on to the next step. Okay? This is not just a JavaScript concept. This isn't just Redux and Express that use this. This is a very common programming thing in general. Just how state is very common across many programming languages and paradigms. So is middleware. It is just some action in between the beginning and the end, hence middleware. It's really that simple. Okay? So some kind of functionality to intercept something before it makes it to the end. In this case, in the terms of Redux, it is to capture every single action that is dispatched before it goes into the reducer. So now that we have our branch made, we're going to first break our app. So we're going to go over to our code. I'm going to close all my files. And the first place I'm going to go to is my main index file. So my index file that is directly inside of source. I'm going to find my import statement for Redux promise. In my case, it's right there. Yours might be slightly different. Just find the Redux promise import and delete it. And then where we're creating our store, we're going to delete everything except for the root reducer. Okay? So back to what it was before we added the middleware. And then we're going to do one more thing. We're going to uninstall it. Now, we don't have to uninstall it. It's no longer being used. And Webpack is smart enough to, if you're not using something, it doesn't automatically include it in the final bundle. It only includes in the bundle what it needs. Even if you're just pulling off part of a library, Webpack will not include the whole library. It will only include the parts that it needs for that specific functionality. So in this case, since we're not using Redux Promise anywhere, it would not actually get included in our final version. But I don't like things in my project that I'm not using. So it's good for you guys to know as well. How do you uninstall something you npm installed? That's seriously it. So from your project directory, so in this case, Redux to-do list, we're going to do npm uninstall, and then the name of the package. In this case, it is redux-promise. Okay. And you can uninstall any packages. Okay, and then it should tell you how many packages it removed. In this case, just 2. Redux Promise is pretty light. I'm surprised it was even 2, honestly. The second one might have been something else, because it also, every time you run an npm command, it checks your all your npm installs, make sure they're up to date and patched and everything like that. That's why it even took as long as it did. So that other package might have been something else that just got cleaned up. So I think Redux Promise itself is only one package. I don't think it has any dependencies. But that's besides the point. So now it's uninstalled. If yours is still uninstalling, that's fine. Let it do its thing. But we can even go to our package JSON. And in our dependencies, we will no longer see Redux promise. Before, it would have been listed by right here at the end. It's no longer there. When you uninstall it, it removes it from your package JSON file, and it removes all the folders from your node modules folders. So it's gone from this project now. I highly recommend if you npm install something and then end up not using it to uninstall it. Okay? If you decide later you're going to use it, just reinstall it. Just a couple keystrokes to do one or the other. All right, so our whole app is now void of middleware. If we tried to look at our app, I believe mine is still running. It is. We get all kinds of errors no matter what. Pretty much all of our routes are going to be broken. Nothing works. Everything's broken. Okay? That middleware was doing a lot for us. It was keeping our app working. Okay? Everybody with me? So far, so good? Everybody has a nice broken app now? Okay. So what we want to do is build our own middleware. So directly inside of the src folder, I'm going to make a new folder. Any guesses to what we're going to call it? Yes. Middleware. And then inside of middleware, we'll make a new file, and we will call it our promise. And I better stick to underscores, so I'm using underscores everywhere else. .js. Okay. The craziest part of middleware is the syntax to write it. It's going to look a little funny, but all middleware is written the same way initially. The template for middleware is always the same. Okay, so we're going to export default our middleware. All right, and it's going to look like this. Store next action, and then our code goes here. Oops, code goes here. Right? So ES6 allows us to write it very nice and concisely. But when you're new to ES6 and programming in general, that could look very confusing on what the hell is going on there. So what this actually is doing is a function that is being passed the Redux store that then returns another function that gets passed whatever function is next, that then returns a function that gets past our action. And then code goes here. So that is doing the exact same thing. That's what that up there is doing. It's just nicer, albeit harder to read initially, to write in ES6. But it's just a function that returns a function that returns a function. Okay? And just because of the way Redux is set up, that is how the middleware has to be written. Because as the middleware goes through different stages, it's passed different information and configured in such a way to ultimately work how it does. Okay? There is a really nice long article on the Redux website. Once again, Redux is its own standalone thing. There is just a plain old Redux library. They have a website with documentation. If you go to their Redux website, look at middleware, there's a really nice long article that explains why it is like this. Okay? If you care to know the why behind all this, I recommend reading that page. Okay? Beyond that, if you ever want to write your own custom middleware, all you need to do is remember store next action. You're going to store the next action. It's not exactly what it does, but it makes it easier to remember. All right, so store is the Redux store. It contains all the state and the functionality of the Redux store. It has a dispatch property on it to dispatch actions. It has a method on it to get the state. Kind of the main things it does. Next, whenever we call next, we pass it an action, and it goes on to the next middleware or to the reducer, whatever's next in line to happen. So next is just go to the next thing. Next is literally that function. So when you're calling next, you're not calling a function that sends something to the next function. You are literally just calling the next function. Okay? And then action is our action. Whatever action was dispatched, our action that has a type and possibly a payload, that is the action that was dispatched. Every single action passes through middleware. Okay, so what we want to do for ours, if you copied this example, please make sure it's commented out so it doesn't throw errors. I'm going to delete my example. If you want to leave it there for yourself, you can leave it. Just make sure every line is commented. All right, so what we first want to do is we want to determine that we're going to kind of do this backwards, but our end goal is to determine if it has a payload property and that payload is a promise. In doing that, we're going to make sure that if it doesn't have a payload and the payload, if it does have a payload, that the payload is not a promise, then we don't care about it. We just want it to go to the next thing and not change anything. Okay, so to do that, like I said, it's a little bit backwards. You don't have to do it backwards, but ultimately this makes more sense to me, so sorry. But you can do whatever you want in here, okay? You can, however you want to handle whatever it is you're trying to get your middleware to do, you can do whatever you want. Okay? But you're always checking for a specific thing inside your action. Once you find that specific thing, you need to fix it or update it or change it. Because ultimately, that same action, after you change it, is going to come through this middleware a second time. And if you didn't resolve whatever you were trying to fix or whatever you're checking for, you create an infinite loop. That's just like writing a while loop and never having an exit strategy. Okay? You need an exit strategy here. Well, we'll talk about that more in a minute. I'm going to draw you guys a nice picture on the whiteboard. It'll be the only time you ever see me draw.
I've never even seen the screen.
This will be the one time. All right. So we want to say if action does not have a payload. So we'll say if not action dot payload. Okay. So if there is no payload, or if action.payload is not a promise. Well, how do we determine if something is a promise? It's a little tricky. There's not yet, at least to the best of my knowledge, I mean, there might be something in the works. There might be some super new way to do it. But to the best of my knowledge, there's no direct way to check if something's a promise. Now, you can console log it, and it'll tell you promise. So, you know, it's very easy to see that's a promise. I'm surprised there's not like a type of or some kind of check like that yet. But there isn't, at least to the best of my knowledge. There might eventually be, or once again, it might be in the works of doing something like that. But as of right now, there's no direct way to check that something is a promise. But there is one method that all promises always have. What method is that? Then. Promises always have a then method. So we could say if action.payload.then. So if there is no then method, okay? So if there's no payload, or there is a payload but there's no then we don't care about it, okay? We just want it to move on with its life. And to move on with its life, we say return next, and we pass it the action. Okay? So we're not changing anything. We're not doing anything with it. We're just move along, just pushing it through. Okay? Because there's no promise here. We don't care about it. Just, you know, keep doing what you're doing. We only care about stuff with promises on the payload. Okay? So that means if the code makes it to here, that means we have a promise. Okay? So we want to resolve that promise. I'm going to write it with .then first, and then I'm going to convert it to async await. But there's a reason I want to do it with .then first. We'll talk about that in a second. So if action.payload contains a promise, how do we resolve a promise? I just gave you the answer. .then. Okay. Then takes a callback function that will get whatever response from the promise. So now what we want to do is we want to change our promise. We want to, or not our promise, our action. We want to alter the action to no longer have that promise on the payload, but to have whatever response we got from the promise. So what we'll do is we'll create a new action. And we want to deconstruct the old action because remember, it has that type property on it. And we want to make sure we don't mess up the type property. So we want to make sure we get that type property on there. And the reason we don't just say type equals action.type is because they might have put other properties on there that we don't know about. We can't account for every property someone might have put on there. So if we do this, that handles that. This handles no matter what property somebody put on their action, this will make sure that they get passed along without us messing up their action. Okay? The one property we want to change, because that is the property we're checking for. Remember, we have to resolve the issue that we're checking for. This will resolve that issue by changing the payload property. And we'll just set that to our response. Okay? So we've rebuilt the action, but we've changed one property inside of it. Okay? Whenever you change it, you can't just send it to the next thing. You have to start over. And to restart the whole process over, go back through all the middleware, because you might have more than one piece of middleware. And you want the order of the middleware to not matter. Okay, so we want to resend this action out. So we want to say store.dispatch. That's why I kept stressing on the word dispatch. Okay, and we want to dispatch our new action. So we changed our action. Anytime you change it, you have to redispatch it. If you don't change it, you could just call next. But as soon as you change anything inside that action, you need to redispatch it. And that's where my drawing is going to come in a second to help illustrate why this matters. Okay, so that's mostly it. Okay, so we npm installed that much code. Now, when we npm installed it, there was a lot more than this. But its core functionality is this. If you actually even look at their code, it looks very similar to this. Okay, they just have a lot more fluff on it. They have a little bit more error handling and some other crap on it. But for the most part, what it's doing is this exact thing. So, and people love npm installing stuff that takes you a couple lines of code to write yourself. And when you npm install it, you're installing a lot more code than you're usually using. So keep that in mind. Next time you're like, I need to see how many properties this object has. I don't feel like figuring out how to do that. I bet there's a package for it. And then npm installing some package that tells you how many keys are in an object. Yes, sir.
I might be having a big brain fart here, but the if statement, the action.payload or the action.payload.then, why can't you just do not action.payload? It would cover both, wouldn't it?
It would not. Because it might
If it doesn't have a payload, then how would it have a dot then at the end of payload?
Because it will throw an error if it doesn't have a payload. Because you can't read property then of undefined, you'll get that error. So that's why you got to check first. Good question. Okay, everybody get that? The reason we check for payload first is because if we don't, and there is no payload, when it tries to do action.payload.then, it'll throw an error if there is no payload. So we need to actually check to see if payload is first. That way, if it's first, it'll just jump down here and it'll never try and read that. If it tries to read that, if payload's undefined, it'll say it can't read property then of undefined. Throwing in there. Watch that when you're checking objects in general. You'll run across that issue. Very good question, though. All right. So, anyways, there's nothing wrong with npm installing some stuff. Okay, but as new developers, especially, you guys should be trying to write as much code yourself as possible for practice. Now, if you're at a job, there's a deadline. Your boss is like, you need this done in a week. npm install the crap out of shit. As long as it's okay with where you work. If that's what they do, do it. But when you're building projects on your own, try and avoid just npm installing everything. It is really good practice to try and build stuff your own. Build stuff yourself. When I first learned Redux, I just npm installed all the middleware. And then I'm like, I want to see what the hell middleware is. When I saw it, I laughed because of how simple it actually is. Now, the concept's a little bit hard to wrap your brain around, but it helped me understand Redux a lot more once I understood middleware as well. All these little pieces, by coding them out yourselves, will help you understand the bigger picture of what's actually happening. I've thought about it. There's a couple things it does that I don't like. It actually wouldn't be that hard to rewrite it. Because JavaScript could do network requests without Ajax or Axios, so just because those are using core JavaScript to do what they do. It's just a lot to write out by hand everything, because you got to make the call, then you got to process it as it comes in, then you got to put it together, and then once it's done, you have your data. It's like a 3 or 4 step process to do by yourself. But it's not so bad. You should look it up.
Okay.
All right. So we should have some mostly working middleware. There might be one problem we have still. Let's see if we run into it. I think by not using await, we should run into the problem. Because if we use async await, it automatically fixes a problem we're going to have. So I think if we do it this way, it won't fix it. And I'll show you what I'm rambling about in a minute. All right. So we're good. Everybody's good here? I hope so. I've been rambling on for like 10 minutes. You had plenty of time to finish. All right. So Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to import my middleware I just wrote. So I'm going to say import our promise, short for Redux promise. I just wanted to give it a different name so you guys didn't confuse it with the npm installed one. And that's going to be this directory, middleware, our promise. All right, and then we use it the exact same way we used the other promise. So on create store, we give it a second argument of default state, which is just an empty object. And then we call apply middleware. And we pass it our middleware. Now, we could give it more middleware just by separating. We could give it as many pieces of middleware as we have. Okay, that'll be important in a second. But for now, we're just going to stick with the one piece of middleware. This should theoretically fix our app mostly. So we could already see if you did your middleware right. We have our list. So click on one of these. It'll toggle complete. All this works. Beautiful. Where we might run into issues is on add item. Okay. Notice it worked, but it didn't. We don't see our item added up here. If I refresh the page, you'll see my middleware test will be there, so it added it, but it's redirecting before it finishes adding. So that means it's ignoring the await in the code. Okay, so it kind of works, but we have a little bit of an issue here where it's not stopping when it adds before it redirects. And if we look at the code, but before we do that, is everybody's working or does anybody need help with anything? Everybody's good?
Oh, give me 1 second.
I was going to say that's going to be a first that we did the middleware and no one's broke. Who said they were getting there? Couple of you? One of you? Did it read property to 5? By middleware or promise? Let's see, middleware. It was all working before, right? Huh?
No, it was actually,
Oh yeah, when it was.
I guess.
But I mean, before we started all this, it was working, right? Okay. Looks okay. Just need to refresh. Yep. Anybody else? All right. So if we look to where our trouble is, once again, just to reiterate, and when I go to add an item, it redirects, but it's redirecting faster than it's redirecting before the server gets updated. So when it comes here and pulls the data, the new item hasn't been added yet, so I don't see my item in the list. So if we go to the root of this problem, if we go to our add item, save item, right here, when we're calling add list item is one of our action creators. add list item is no longer returning a promise. If we were doing it the old style way where we said this dot props dot then, it would throw an error that dot then is not defined. Or dot then is not a property or whatever the error is. We would have gotten an error. The only reason we're not getting an error now is just because async await's nice to us and doesn't throw an error, but it also doesn't stop here. It just goes, doot, doot, you know, faster than that. And I'm pretty sure it makes that same beeping noise though. Okay, so since there's no promise, it just runs that code all together. So what we need to do is make sure that our action creators that have promises are returning promises. Okay, it's a nice feature that Redux Promise thought of and really easy for us to fix. Okay, so if we go back to our promise, all we need to do is at the bottom of our middleware, we just need to return action.payload. Okay, so essentially just return the promise. That way when anybody calls our action creator, it returns the promise. It's really mind-bending to understand why returning a promise here returns a promise from our action creator, but it does. So that will fix the issue. Fully understanding middleware is a lot harder than what's something that's really hard to understand. Understanding women. No, so it's really mind-boggling to kind of wrap your brain around this. The more important part to take away from middleware is, hold on. The real important part to take away from middleware is that it intercepts every action and gives you a chance to interact with the add action before it goes to the reducer. Okay? You don't have to understand the how of it right this second. Okay? Deeper understanding comes, once again, I know I've said this 100 times, but the more you use stuff like this, the more you use Redux, all this stuff will slowly start to click and make sense. You won't even realize it's making more sense until one day you'll just be like, oh shit, now I get it. Right now, just take it at face value. Tanya, that's, for better or worse, that's what I do. I use stuff, and then as it starts to make sense, then I'll be like, oh, okay, I'm starting to understand this. And then I'll even go onto the internet and start reading about it. And when I'm reading about it, I could relate to what the hell the article's talking about, as is before. If I just read about it before I've even used it, I have no idea what the article's even talking about. I'm sure you guys have all experienced trying to read up on stuff where you're just completely lost on what the hell they're talking about, because you have no context for what they're talking about. So don't be afraid to jump in, start using stuff. Now I got to stress this one enough because I've been misquoted on saying this before. Well, Scott says we don't need to understand what we're using. That is not what I'm saying, not even in the least bit. If you're going to use something, you should understand it. But don't let the understanding stop you from starting to use it. Start using it, understanding will follow. All right. So now that we have our nice middleware all working, let's draw a picture on the board to talk a little bit more about the difference between next and dispatch and why it matters. I don't want to be a cameraman. I just want to use the camera. There we go. I don't know how well this will show up on video, but I'll at least try for you guys. Hope you guys are about ready to be amazed and dazzled by my art skills. There's a reason I don't draw on board. That's really on there. Oh, all right. Now the next trick is if I can find a marker that works. All right. So up here is our action creators. Creators. Thank you. Okay. Our action creators spit out little actions. Okay. Remember, actions are just objects. Okay. Those then go. Oh, there it goes. There it goes. I think part of the problem is I hit the fluid. Hold on. Hold that thought.
Someone go for it right now.
You're right there.
Sounds cooler.
Thank you.
You won't understand this back end.
Maybe, yeah.
You won't understand this back end.
Thank you.
Oh, I leave that. Hey, it's actual.
Jesus. Why did you ruin it?
It's not supposed to have an end, man. What do you
I
think?
know, man. Aren't you listening?
Thank you. Let's try another blue one. Try a green one. All right, so let's try and finish our little boxes here. Okay, all of our little boxes here are middleware. Middleware. Okay, so your action comes down, hits one middleware, goes down, hits another middleware, goes down, hits another middleware, and then ultimately goes down into the reducer. Okay? This is beautiful right here. Okay? So as your action comes through each middleware, let's say we have a middleware that fixes all the data, reorganizes the data, fixes data structure from an API call. Let's say we have our promise here, Redux promise, that resolves our promise.
Fixes structure.
I'm having a hard time finishing words. And then this one, let's just say this is like some kind of like logger one that just logs all the actions. Doesn't really matter. All right. So we dispatch an action that has a promise on it. Okay. It comes through here. It doesn't have our data on it, so it doesn't do anything. Comes through here. The promise is resolved. Now, if we just called next, whenever we call next, it just goes to the next thing. Well, our data one is up above the promise one. Now, we could fix this by making sure we put the promise one first and then have the data one follow. When you write your middleware, you never want to assume the order it's going to be in, though. Okay, you want to write your middleware so it doesn't matter the order that it goes in. So when you call next, I almost forgot the T, and you put your action in it, it just goes down to the next thing, and next to the next thing, and so on and so forth. When you call dispatch, so let's say Redux promise, we've changed our action. Whenever you change your action, dispatch sends it back up through the whole process again. Okay? So dispatch, no matter where dispatch is at, it always sends it back up, back around, back through the whole process. That's why you need to be checking for a specific thing inside of each middleware that gets resolved by that middleware. Okay? So like Redux promise, we're checking for a promise. After it leaves here, there is no longer payload.then. We got rid of it. So it's safe to send it back up through. So next time it comes here, it'll fail that check and then just go on to the next thing because it no longer has a promise, so it'll just carry on. First time it comes, it'll hit here, get redispatched. Now it has the data. The data can get fixed. Comes back here, no promise. Here, console logs out the action, and then goes into the reducer to update the state. Okay? That is the difference between next and dispatch. And anytime you change the action, it needs to be dispatched so it has the chance to be affected by any other middleware that it needs to be affected by. That makes sense? I know it all makes sense thanks to my awesome art skills and spelling ability. I won a spelling bee in 3rd grade. And that was the last time I knew how to spell. And that's where my spelling plateaued. Always been good with numbers, not letters. Any questions about that? I don't know if you'll be able to see any of this in the video. Maybe, but I probably sit in front of the camera most of the time. So, but if you want to listen to me drone on about it again, the video's there. All right, so that's middleware. We're going to be making more middleware when we do our authentication. We're going to be recreating a different middleware for handling promises. One of the most popular middlewares out there is Redux Thunk. It's used very widely. It's not the only one. There's also Redux Saga and a couple other really popular ones, but Redux Thunk is extremely popular. It actually takes less lines of code to write than Redux Promise does, and it's extremely powerful in what it does in the 2-3 lines of code. But just whoever thought of it was a genius. It's very simple. It's so simple, it's insane. But anyways, we'll revisit middleware. The good news is, realistically, are you ever going to need to write your own middleware? Probably not. Honestly. Anywhere you go, they're going to have everything already set up. They're going to be probably already have NPM installed their own middleware. But I would encourage you, if you ever do projects on your own, try writing your own middleware. I did a calculator in React and Redux, and I used middleware to handle some of the calculations. And that is what actually helped me understand middleware better by doing that. Okay, so I recommend trying it. But if this scares the crap out of you, don't worry, you'll probably never actually need to do it outside of here. Here, I'm just going to make you do it. But beyond this, you'll probably never need to see middleware directly again. But you do need to understand middleware, because you will, if you're using Redux, you're going to be using middleware, whether you realize it or not. The cool thing about middleware is you usually don't have to interact with it in any way, shape, or form. All right, any last questions before I hide my beautiful art? I'll take a picture of this and sell it to each of you for $5 a piece. I think that's like a bargain.
Yeah, he already took a picture. So
damn it!
$4.
I should have filed a patent. So we wrote our own middleware. Well, we removed middleware. We wrote our own. Ran into a little issue of it not returning a promise. Fixed that, and then the screen disappeared. What happened? I'd swear it was on when I walked away, right?
You turned it? Yeah. Because it was.
Did I?
Yeah, because it was hitting the screen.
Man, I'm going crazy.
Oh, thanks,
It's Friday.
Leah.
It has been a really long week too, man.
Your picture is on our Slack.
All these part-time and group classes and crap really wears on you after a while. So crazy, I think monitors are on even when they're not. Hey, we're pretty much done anyways. Okay, it's on, right? It's not funny, guys. All right. Shit, after forgetting letters, I really think I'm losing it. All right. So we removed the installed middleware, made our own, fixed a little issue with it. Our app should be fully working again. You can feel free to merge this into master. If you don't want to merge it to master, still add commit and save it to this branch. That way you have a version of it. Once again, we're going to jump into user authentication a little bit today, and then we'll be carrying that on Tuesday. There's not going to be any direct React homework for you guys other than just to work on your final projects, okay? Any final last questions on middleware? It's super awesome once you understand it. All right, guys, take a little break. Want to meet with your group, take a break. We'll get started about 4:30. Gives about 20 minutes. And then we will jump into user authentication, high order components. What we're going to do, though, instead of jumping directly into high order components, we're going to set up our project for Tuesday, so that's all out of the way, okay? And then that will be it for today. I'll see you guys in 20 minutes. Unless you're watching me on a video, then might be a while.